The gunshots echoed through the mountains as Vivienne Oakes raced through the forest, her heart pounding harder than her horse's hooves against the dirt. Blood trickled from a graze on her shoulder, but the pain was nothing compared to the terror of what lay behind her. 4 men on horseback, their faces twisted with rage and revenge, were closing in men who blamed her for the hanging of their brother. The year was 1876, and the California wilderness offered no mercy to those who couldn't fend for themselves. Vivienne's mare was tiring quickly, having run for nearly 15 miles from the small mining settlement where everything had gone so terribly wrong. The animal's labored breathing told her they couldn't maintain this pace much longer. "Come on, girl," she whispered, leaning forward against the horse's neck. "Just a little further." The sun was beginning to set over the Sierra Nevada, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. Ahead, through the trees, Vivienne spotted a small cabin with smoke rising from its chimney. It was risky to approach, but she was running out of options. Her pursuers would catch her in open country once darkness fell. As she broke from the tree line, the cabin came into full view, a modest structure with a small corral beside it. A man was chopping wood in the yard, his back to her. Hearing the approach of her horse, he turned quickly, dropping the axe and reaching for the rifle that leaned against a nearby stump. Yates Vance had been living on this isolated homestead for 3 years, and unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. The tall cowboy's weathered face registered surprise as he saw a woman riding hard toward his property. Behind her, the distant sound of more riders approached. Vivienne reined her horse to a stop, nearly falling from the saddle as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. "Please," she gasped, her voice cracking with desperation. "They're going to kill me." Yates took in her appearance, the torn dress, the blood on her shoulder, and the unmistakable fear in her eyes. Without hesitation, he grabbed the reins of her horse. "Get inside," he said firmly, helping her down from the saddle. "Take your horse to the back of the cabin. There's a small shed." "Hide her there." Vivienne didn't question him. She led her trembling mare behind the cabin while Yates grabbed his rifle and took position near the front porch. By the time she returned, the sounds of approaching horses had grown louder. "Who are they?" Yates asked, his voice low and steady. "The Harmon brothers," Vivienne replied, trying to catch her breath. "Their brother was hanged for murder last month in Sacramento. I was the witness who testified against him." Yates nodded grimly. The Harmons had a reputation that stretched across 3 counties: thieves and killers who operated with impunity until recently. He'd heard about the hanging, but hadn't connected it to the frightened woman before him. "Stay inside," he instructed, handing her a loaded revolver from his belt. "If things go badly, there's a trapdoor under the rug leading to a root cellar. You can escape through the tunnel that leads to the creek bed." Vivienne took the gun with shaking hands. "You don't have to do this. You don't even know me." "I know enough," Yates replied simply. "Go on now." As she retreated into the cabin, Yates positioned himself beside a large oak tree, his rifle at the ready. The 4 riders emerged from the forest, slowing their horses as they approached the clearing. Their leader, a man with a thick black beard and a scar across his left cheek, raised his hand to halt the others. "You there?" the man called out. "We're looking for a woman who came this way, blonde hair, riding a chestnut mare." Yates kept his rifle visible but not aimed directly at them. "Haven't seen anyone like that," he replied calmly. "Just been chopping wood all afternoon." The bearded man frowned, scanning the property. "Mind if we have a look around? She's a thief who stole something valuable from us in Rosedale." "I mind plenty," Yates said firmly. "This is private property. If you've lost something, I suggest you take it up with the sheriff in Yosemite." The 4 men exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. Yates could feel the tension hanging in the air like the gathering storm clouds above. "Look, mister," the leader said, his hand moving subtly toward his holstered pistol. "We don't want any trouble with you. This is between us and the woman." "There's no woman here," Yates insisted, adjusting his stance slightly. "And I'd take it as a personal favor if you'd move along now." The bearded man's face darkened. "You're making a mistake, Cowboy. The Harmons don't take kindly to people interfering in family business." "Neither do I," Yates replied evenly. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the leader spat on the ground and nodded to his companions. "We'll be back. And when we find out you're lying, you'll wish you'd made a different choice today." Yates remained still, his finger resting near the trigger of his rifle as the men slowly turned their horses and rode back toward the tree line. Only when they had disappeared from sight did he lower his weapon and return to the cabin. Inside, Vivienne stood by the window, the revolver clutched tightly in her hands. She'd watched the entire exchange, her heart in her throat. "They'll come back," she said softly, "probably after dark." Yates nodded, moving to the fireplace to stoke the dying embers. "I know, we have some preparations to make before then." "Why would you risk your life for a stranger?" Vivienne asked, studying his face in the fading light. Yates was silent for a moment, considering her question. "My sister was killed by men like that 5 years ago. No one stood up for her." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "I couldn't live with myself if I turned you away." Vivienne felt a lump in her throat. "My name is Vivienne Oakes." "Yates Vance," he replied, offering his hand. As their fingers touched, a connection sparked between them, two souls brought together by chance and circumstance in the wilderness of California. "How badly are you hurt?" he asked, noticing again the blood on her shoulder. "Just a graze," she said, wincing slightly as she moved her arm. "One of them got lucky as I was riding away." "Let me take a look," Yates said, retrieving a wooden box from a shelf. Inside were basic medical supplies, bandages, alcohol, and a few herbal remedies. "It needs cleaning at the very least." Vivienne hesitated, then nodded, moving to sit at the small table in the center of the room. She pulled back the torn fabric of her dress to expose the wound. Yates worked silently, his hands gentle as he cleaned the graze with alcohol. Vivienne bit her lip to keep from crying out at the sting. "You're good at this," she observed, watching him work. "Spent 2 years as a cavalry scout," he explained. "You learned to patch up all sorts of wounds in that line of work." He wrapped a clean bandage around her shoulder. "This should hold for now, but we'll need to change it tomorrow." Tomorrow. The word hung between them, a reminder that surviving the night was far from certain. "Tell me about the Harmons," Yates said as he put away the medical supplies. "I need to know what we're dealing with." Vivienne took a deep breath. "Wallace Harmon robbed the Sacramento bank 3 months ago. He killed 2 people, including a young teller who was trying to protect a child. I was there, dropping off money for the ranch where I worked." She paused, the memories clearly painful. "I saw his face clearly. He wasn't wearing a mask." "And you testified against him," Yates concluded. She nodded. "The sheriff convinced me it was my duty, said they'd protect me." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "That protection lasted exactly 2 days after the hanging. Then the marshal who was supposed to escort me to San Francisco disappeared, and the Harmon brothers showed up at my boarding house." "How long have you been running?" 4 days, she replied, exhaustion evident in her voice. "I've barely slept. They pick up my trail every time I think I've lost them." Yates moved to the window, scanning the darkening forest. "They won't find you here," he said with quiet determination. As night fell, they worked together to prepare for the inevitable return of the Harmon brothers. Yates showed Vivienne the layout of the cabin and the surrounding area, identifying the best escape routes if things went badly. They moved furniture to create defensive positions and extinguished all but a single lamp. "You should try to get some rest," Yates suggested as the clock approached midnight. "I'll keep watch." Vivienne shook her head. "I couldn't sleep even if I wanted to." Yates studied her for a moment, then reached for something on a high shelf. He brought down a battered wooden chess set. "Do you play?" A small smile touched Vivienne's lips for the first time since her arrival. "My father taught me when I was a girl." They sat at the table, the chess pieces illuminated by the soft glow of the lamp. As they played, Vivienne found herself relaxing slightly, grateful for the distraction from the danger that lurked outside. "Where did you learn to play?" she asked, moving her knight to capture one of his pawns. "My grandfather," Yates replied. He said it taught patience and strategy, both useful skills for a man making his way in the world. He countered her move by advancing his bishop. "What about you? You mentioned a ranch, the Double Diamond," Vivienne said. "I worked as a bookkeeper for Mr. Coleman. Before that, I taught at a small school near Sacramento until it closed for lack of funds." "A teacher and a bookkeeper," Yates observed. "Seems a far cry from being hunted by outlaws." "Life takes unexpected turns," she replied softly. "What about you?" "How does a cavalry scout end up alone in a cabin in the woods?" A shadow crossed his face. "After my sister was killed, I spent 2 years tracking down the men responsible. When it was done, I found I had little taste for civilization anymore." He gestured to the cabin around them. "This place suits me. It's quiet, uncomplicated." "Until today," Vivienne said apologetically. "Until today," he agreed, but there was no resentment in his voice. Their conversation was cut short by the sound of a branch snapping outside. Both froze, instantly alert. Yates extinguished the lamp and moved silently to the window, peering into the darkness. "3 of them," he whispered. "They've split up, trying to surround the cabin." Vivienne felt fear clawing at her throat but forced it down. She checked the revolver Yates had given her, making sure it was loaded and ready. "Remember what I showed you," Yates said quietly. "If I tell you to run, you go through the cellar tunnel. Don't wait for me." Before Vivienne could respond, a voice called out from the darkness. "We know she's in there, Cowboy. Send her out now and you can go on with your life. This doesn't have to involve you." Yates didn't respond, instead moving to position himself near the front door. He nodded to Vivienne, who took up her position behind an overturned table. A moment later, gunfire erupted, bullets splintering through the cabin's windows. Yates returned fire, his shots carefully placed. A cry of pain from outside told them at least one had found its mark. "You're making a big mistake," the voice shouted, anger now evident. "We'll burn you out if we have to." The shooting continued sporadically for several minutes, neither side gaining an advantage. Then Vivienne spotted a flicker of movement through the broken window, one of the men attempting to approach from the side with what appeared to be an oil lamp in his hand. "Yates!" she called out in warning, raising her revolver. He spun just as Vivienne fired. Her shot went wide, but it was enough to startle the man, who dropped the lamp. It shattered on the ground, igniting immediately. The flames spread quickly to the dry brush near the cabin wall. "Damn it," Yates muttered, seeing the fire begin to spread. He fired twice more through the window, forcing the attackers to take cover, then turned to Vivienne. "We need to move. Now." The smoke was already seeping into the cabin as Yates pulled back the rug, revealing the trapdoor he'd mentioned earlier. He threw it open and gestured for Vivienne to descend. "What about you?" she asked, hesitating. "Right behind you," he promised. "Go." Vivienne climbed down into the darkness of the root cellar. Yates passed down a lantern and his rifle before following her, pulling the trapdoor shut above them. The cellar was small, with earthen walls and a low ceiling. At the far end, a narrow tunnel had been dug, shored up with wooden beams. "This way," Yates said, lighting the lantern and leading her into the tunnel. "It comes out about 100 yards from the cabin near the creek." They moved as quickly as possible through the confined space, the sounds of gunfire and shouting growing fainter behind them. The air was stale and heavy with the scent of damp earth. After what seemed like an eternity but was probably only a few minutes, they reached the tunnel's end. Yates extinguished the lantern and carefully pushed open the concealed door, which had been disguised with brush and rocks. He peered out into the night, checking for any signs of their pursuers. "Clear," he whispered, helping Vivienne out of the tunnel. They emerged near a small creek, the water glistening in the moonlight. In the distance, they could see the orange glow of the cabin, now fully engulfed in flames. "Everything you own," Vivienne said, her voice thick with guilt. "I'm so sorry." Yates shook his head. Just things can be replaced. He pointed toward a rocky outcropping nearby. My horse is hidden in a small cave just beyond those rocks. We need to move quickly. The fire will keep them occupied for a while, but they'll figure out we escaped soon enough. They made their way to the cave where Yates's horse, a sturdy black gelding, was waiting patiently. Vivienne remembered her own mare, still hidden in the shed behind the burning cabin. My horse, she began, but Yates cut her off. The shed is far enough from the cabin that she should be safe from the fire, but we can't risk going back now. Reluctantly, Vivienne nodded. Yates helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. The proximity was intimate, his chest warm against her back as he reached around her to take the reins. "Where are we going?" she asked as they set off through the forest, away from the burning cabin. "I have a friend who has a place near Yosemite," Yates replied, "about 15 miles from here. We should be able to reach it by morning if we're careful." They rode in silence for a time, picking their way carefully through the trees. The night was cool, and Vivienne found herself grateful for the warmth of Yates's body behind her. Despite the danger, despite everything she had been through, there was something comforting about his presence. "Thank you," she said quietly after they had been riding for nearly an hour. "You've given up everything to help me." "Not everything," Yates replied, his voice close to her ear. "And I made my choice. Don't carry that burden." As the night wore on, they took turns dozing in the saddle, one always remaining alert for signs of pursuit. Dawn found them nearing the edge of the forest, with the valley that led to Yosemite visible in the distance. "We'll rest here for a bit," Yates decided, guiding his horse to a small clearing beside a stream. "Let the horse drink and recover some strength." They dismounted, both stiff from the long night of riding. Vivienne stretched, wincing as the movement pulled at her injured shoulder. The bandage Yates had applied was spotted with blood. "Let me check that," he said, noticing her discomfort. As he gently removed the bandage, their eyes met. Something passed between them, a recognition of the bond that had formed in the face of danger. "It's not too bad," Yates said, breaking the moment. "But we should clean it again when we reach safety." They allowed themselves only a brief rest before continuing their journey. The terrain changed as they descended into the valley, forests giving way to meadows dotted with wildflowers. Under different circumstances, it would have been breathtakingly beautiful. "There," Yates said eventually, pointing to a small ranch nestled against the base of the mountains. "That's Marcus Fletcher's place. He and I served together in the cavalry." As they approached the ranch, a tall man with graying hair emerged from the barn, a shotgun held cautiously in his hands. When he recognized Yates, his stance relaxed. "Yates Vance," the man called out, a smile spreading across his weathered face. "Been a long time." "Too long, Marcus," Yates replied as they reached the yard. Marcus's expression grew serious as he took in their appearance, the exhaustion, Vivienne's blood-stained dress, the tension in their postures. "Trouble, the kind that burns cabins and shoots at women," Yates confirmed grimly. Marcus nodded once. "Then you'd better come inside." The ranch house was modest but comfortable, with a large kitchen and several bedrooms. Marcus's wife, Sarah, a kind-faced woman in her 40s, took one look at Vivienne and immediately set about making her comfortable. "You poor dear," she said, leading Vivienne to a chair by the fire. "Let's get you cleaned up and find you some fresh clothes." While Sarah tended to Vivienne, Yates explained the situation to Marcus in low tones. The older man listened gravely, occasionally asking a clarifying question. "The Harmons," Marcus said thoughtfully when Yates had finished. "I've heard of them, bad business. How many did you say there were?" "4 that I saw," Yates replied. "Though I'm pretty sure I wounded one before we escaped." Marcus considered this information. "They'll be watching the roads to Yosemite and the surrounding settlements. Word travels fast in these parts." "I know," Yates said, rubbing his jaw wearily. "That's why I came here instead, needed somewhere to regroup, figure out our next move." "You're welcome to stay as long as needed," Marcus assured him. "Sarah and I don't get many visitors these days. The children are all grown and gone to San Francisco or further east." In the kitchen, Sarah had provided Vivienne with a clean dress and was now examining her wounded shoulder. "You're lucky," she observed. "Another inch to the left and it would have been much worse." Vivienne winced as Sarah applied a salve to the injury. "It doesn't feel very lucky." Sarah smiled sympathetically. "I understand, but you're alive and you found Yates. In my experience, he's about the best ally a person could have in a difficult situation." "You've known him long, since before he bought that cabin of his," Sarah replied. "He helped Marcus and our boys fight off rustlers about 4 years ago. Stayed with us while he was recovering from a bullet wound of his own." She wrapped a fresh bandage around Vivienne's shoulder. "He's a good man, carries too much on his shoulders sometimes, but good to the core." After they had eaten a simple but hearty meal, Marcus showed them to a small guest cabin behind the main house. "You'll be more comfortable here," he explained. "And if trouble comes, you'll have your own space to defend or escape from." The cabin consisted of a single room with a bed, a table with 2 chairs, and a small stove. It was clean and well-maintained, clearly used regularly by visitors to the ranch. "I'll take the floor," Yates said once Marcus had left them alone. Vivienne shook her head. "You've done enough." "I can't take your bed too." "It's not my bed," he pointed out with a hint of a smile. "And you need the rest more than I do, please." Too exhausted to argue further, Vivienne relented. She sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. Tears welled in her eyes, and despite her efforts to control them, they began to fall. Yates knelt before her, concern etched on his features. "Are you in pain?" "I can ask Sarah for something to help." "It's not that," Vivienne said, trying to wipe away the tears. "It's just everything, your cabin, the danger I've brought to your friends. I never wanted any of this." Gently, Yates took her hands in his. "Listen to me, Vivienne. You did what was right, testifying against a murderer. The consequences of that choice aren't your fault. They're the responsibility of men who choose violence over justice." "But I made my choice too," he interrupted softly, "and I don't regret it." Their eyes met, and for a moment the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. Then Yates stood, clearing his throat. "You should rest," he said. "We'll figure out our next steps tomorrow." Vivienne nodded, suddenly aware of how truly exhausted she was. She lay down on the bed, and within minutes, despite all the thoughts racing through her mind, she was asleep. Yates watched her for a moment, struck by how vulnerable she looked in sleep. The fierce determination that had kept her going through days of pursuit had given way to peaceful exhaustion. He arranged his bedroll on the floor and stretched out, his rifle within easy reach. Despite his own fatigue, sleep eluded him as he pondered their situation. The Harmons wouldn't give up easily. They had a reputation for tenacity, especially when it came to family matters. With their brother hanged, they would pursue Vivienne relentlessly. Running wasn't a long-term solution. Eventually, they would have to make a stand, but where? And how these thoughts tumbled through Yates's mind as he finally drifted into a light, vigilant sleep. Morning came too quickly. Yates woke to the sound of activity outside the cabin, horses and men's voices. He was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, before recognizing Marcus's voice among them. Vivienne stirred, alarmed by his sudden movement. "What is it?" "Just Marcus," Yates assured her, lowering his weapon. "Stay here, I'll check what's happening." Outside, he found Marcus talking with 2 men on horseback. They fell silent as Yates approached. "Yates," Marcus called out, his tone carefully neutral. "These gentlemen are from the sheriff's office in Yosemite. They're looking for information about some trouble at your cabin." Yates studied the 2 men, neither of whom wore an official badge. The taller one, a red-headed man with a scar across his nose, smiled thinly. "Mr. Vance," he said, "we understand there was a fire at your property last night." Neighbors reported gunfire as well. "I don't have any neighbors for miles," Yates replied evenly, "and I've been here visiting my old friend since yesterday afternoon." The second man, shorter with a bushy mustache, leaned forward in his saddle. "That's so. Interesting, because we also heard reports of a woman wanted for theft who might be in the area." Blonde lady. Pretty from what I'm told. Yates maintained his composure, though inwardly he was calculating how quickly he could reach for his weapon if needed. Can't help you there. Haven't seen anyone matching that description. The red-headed man exchanged a glance with his companion. Well, if you do, you'd be wise to inform the sheriff immediately. She's considered dangerous. I'll keep that in mind, Yates said. The two men tipped their hats and rode away slowly, looking back several times as they departed. Once they were out of earshot, Marcus turned to Yates. Those weren't lawmen, he stated flatly. No, Yates agreed. Harmons or hired by them, they're searching the area. They'll be back, Marcus warned. With more men, I expect. We need to move, Yates decided. Tonight after dark. They spent the day preparing. Marcus provided them with supplies, food, ammunition, and a second horse for Vivienne. Sarah drew maps of little-known trails through the mountains that might provide safe passage. Where will you go? Marcus asked as the sun began to set. Yates considered the question. There's a U.S. Marshal I know in San Francisco, Joshua Reed. Honest man. If we can reach him, he might be able to provide official protection for Vivienne. San Francisco is a long way, Marcus observed, and there are a lot of open roads between here and there. That's why we're not taking roads, Yates replied, pointing to a route on Sarah's map. We'll follow the high country trail through the Sierra. It's difficult terrain, but that works in our favor. Fewer places for ambushes and harder to track. As darkness fell, they prepared to depart. Sarah hugged Vivienne tightly. You stay strong, she whispered. And keep an eye on that stubborn man. He needs someone watching his back. Marcus walked with them to the stable where their horses were waiting. I've packed extra ammunition in the saddlebags, he told Yates, and there's a spare revolver for the lady. Vivienne, now dressed in practical riding clothes borrowed from Sarah, accepted the weapon gratefully. Thank you both, for everything. Be careful, Marcus said, clasping Yates's hand firmly. Those men who came by today, they knew something. I could see it in their eyes. Yates nodded grimly. We'll keep off the main trails. With luck, we'll be in San Francisco before they realize which direction we've gone. They set off under the cover of darkness, riding east into the mountains rather than west towards San Francisco, a deliberate misdirection in case they were being watched. The plan was to circle north through the high country before turning west toward their actual destination. The night was clear. Stars spread like diamonds across the velvet sky. They rode in silence for several hours, both alert for any signs of pursuit. Vivienne's shoulder ached, but she refused to complain. This man had already sacrificed enough on her behalf. You're in pain, Yates observed when they paused to rest the horses beside a small mountain stream. It wasn't a question. I'll manage, Vivienne replied, taking a drink of the cool water. Yates studied her in the moonlight. You're tougher than you look, Vivienne Oakes. Necessity, she said with a slight smile. I've learned that waiting for rescue isn't always an option. Is that what this is? Yates asked quietly. A rescue, she considered his question. No, she decided. This feels more like partnership. Something shifted in Yates's expression, a softening around the eyes, a hint of something beyond the vigilant protector he had been since their meeting. He nodded once, seemingly satisfied with her answer. They continued their journey as the night deepened, climbing steadily into the mountains. The trail grew narrower and more treacherous, but their horses were sure-footed and careful. By dawn, they had reached a high plateau that offered a commanding view of the valley below. We'll rest here for a few hours, Yates decided, dismounting beside a cluster of pine trees that provided some shelter. Keep watch in shifts. They unsaddled the horses and arranged their bedrolls in the shelter of the trees. Vivienne took the first watch, insisting that Yates needed rest more than she did after spending most of the previous night awake. Sitting on a rock overlooking the valley, rifle across her knees, Vivienne found herself thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. A month ago, she had been keeping books for the Double Diamond Ranch, living a quiet, predictable life. Now she was a fugitive in the wilderness, dependent on the courage and skill of a man she barely knew but somehow trusted completely. When it was Yates's turn to keep watch, Vivienne found sleep elusive despite her exhaustion. Her mind kept returning to the cabin in flames, to the danger she had brought into this man's life. And yet, there was something else too, a fluttering in her chest whenever their eyes met, a warmth that had nothing to do with the campfire. They resumed their journey in the late afternoon, continuing along the high trail as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. The mountains here were breathtaking sheer cliffs, deep valleys and forests that stretched as far as the eye could see. "It's beautiful," Vivienne remarked as they paused at a particularly spectacular overlook. "This is why I stayed," Yates said, his gaze taking in the vista before them. "After the war, after tracking down my sister's killers, I found peace in these mountains. And I've taken that from you," Vivienne said softly. Yates turned to her, his expression earnest. "You haven't taken anything I wasn't willing to give." Their moment of connection was interrupted by the distant sound of a gunshot echoing through the mountains. Both tensed, scanning the terrain below. "There," Yates said, pointing to a spot on the trail they had traveled earlier. "3 riders, moving fast." Vivienne felt her heart sink. "How did they find us so quickly?" "Someone at the ranch must have talked," Yates said grimly, "or they were watching more closely than we realized." "What do we do now?" Yates studied the terrain ahead of them. "We keep moving. The trail narrows up ahead, single file only. If they're following us, they'll have to do the same. That gives us an advantage." They pushed on, urging their horses to a faster pace where the trail allowed it. The sun was setting rapidly now, the shadows lengthening across the mountains. In the gathering darkness, they reached the narrow section of trail Yates had mentioned, a precarious path along a cliff face, barely wide enough for a single horse. "I'll go first," Yates said, dismounting to lead his horse. "Stay close, but not too close. If my horse slips, you need room to react." Vivienne nodded, following his example. The cliff drop to their right was dizzying at least 500 feet to the rocks below. She focused on placing one foot in front of the other, keeping a firm grip on her horse's reins. They were about halfway across when a bullet struck the rock face above them, sending fragments of stone raining down. Vivienne's horse reared in fright, nearly sending her over the edge. She clung desperately to the reins, speaking soothingly to the frightened animal. "They've reached the other side," Yates called back to her. "We need to hurry." Another shot rang out, closer this time. Yates returned fire, forcing their pursuers to take cover temporarily. They pressed forward, the trail seeming endless in the fading light. Finally, they reached the other side, where the path widened into a small plateau surrounded by trees. Without pausing, Yates helped Vivienne back onto her horse. "We need to split up," he decided quickly. "There's a fork in the trail just ahead. You take the left path, it leads to a small hunting cabin I know. I'll take the right and draw them after me, then circle back to meet you." "No," Vivienne protested. "We stay together." "Vivienne," Yates said urgently, "trust me, it's our best chance." She wanted to argue further, but the sound of hooves on the narrow trail behind them made the decision for her. "Be careful," she said instead. "The cabin is about 3 miles down the left path. There's a lightning-struck pine at the turnoff, you can't miss it. Wait for me there." With that, they separated, Yates taking the right fork while Vivienne veered left. As Yates had predicted, the sounds of pursuit followed him, the Harmons choosing to chase the more visible target. Vivienne rode hard through the gathering darkness, following the trail as best she could. After what seemed like an eternity, she spotted the lightning-struck pine Yates had described, its trunk split dramatically down the middle. A smaller path led away from the main trail, winding through thick forest. The cabin, when she finally reached it, was little more than a one-room structure made of rough-hewn logs. It was dusty and clearly hadn't been used in some time, but it offered shelter and a defensible position. Vivienne unsaddled her horse and led it to a small lean-to at the side of the cabin, where the animal could rest without being immediately visible from the trail. Inside, she found a stone fireplace, a narrow cot, a table with one chair, and a few basic supplies matches, some preserved food, and a lantern. She debated whether to light a fire, weighing the cold against the risk of the smoke being spotted. In the end, the mountain chill made the decision for her. She built a small fire, hoping the thick forest would hide the smoke in the darkness. Hours passed with no sign of Yates. Vivienne alternated between watching from the cabin's single window and pacing the floor, her worry growing with each passing minute. Had the Harmons caught him? Was he lying wounded somewhere on the mountain, or worse? It was well past midnight when she heard a sound outside, the soft tread of footsteps approaching the cabin. Vivienne extinguished the lantern and positioned herself beside the door, revolver ready. The footsteps paused, then there was a soft knock. "Vivienne, it's me." Relief flooded through her at the sound of Yates's voice. She opened the door to find him standing there, exhausted but unharmed. "Thank God," she breathed, resisting the urge to throw her arms around him. "I was beginning to think." "Sorry it took so long," he said, stepping into the cabin and closing the door behind him. "I had to make sure they were thoroughly misdirected before doubling back." "Did it work?" Yates nodded, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. "They're headed north toward the pass to Nevada. Should give us at least a day's head start towards San Francisco." Vivienne stoked the fire, adding another log to build up the warmth. "There's some food," she offered. "Not much, but something." They shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, both too tired for much conversation. The single cot presented an obvious dilemma, which Yates resolved by insisting that Vivienne take it while he made do with his bedroll on the floor. "You need proper rest to heal," he said when she protested. "I've slept on worse ground than this." Too exhausted to argue, Vivienne lay down on the cot, pulling a thin blanket over herself. Yates stretched out on his bedroll near the fire, his rifle within easy reach. Despite her fatigue, sleep eluded Vivienne. Her mind kept returning to the danger they had faced and to the man who had risked everything to help her. "Yates," she said softly into the darkness, "are you awake?" "Yes," came his quiet reply. "Why did you really help me? And don't say it was because of your sister." "That's part of it, I know, but not all." There was a long silence, and for a moment Vivienne thought he might not answer. "When I saw you riding toward my cabin," he finally said, "there was something in your eyes, not just fear, though that was there too, determination, courage." Another pause. "I recognized something of myself in you, I suppose." The honesty of his answer touched something deep within Vivienne. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for helping me, but for seeing me, really seeing me." In the firelight, she could just make out his profile as he nodded once, acknowledging her words. "We should get some sleep," he said gently. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Morning arrived with a gentle rain tapping on the cabin roof. Vivienne woke to find Yates already up, peering out the window at the gray day beyond. He had rekindled the fire, and the small room was pleasantly warm. "How's the shoulder?" he asked, noticing she was awake. Vivienne rotated it experimentally. "Better, I think." "Still sore, but the bleeding has stopped." "Good." He gestured to a pot hanging over the fire. "Found some coffee in the supplies. It's old, but it should still be drinkable." They shared the bitter brew in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the journey ahead. The rain continued steadily, turning the forest outside into a misty dreamscape. "We should wait for the rain to ease before setting out," Yates decided. "The trails will be treacherous and visibility is poor." Vivienne nodded her agreement. The prospect of a few more hours of rest was welcome. As they waited, Yates took the opportunity to check their supplies and clean their weapons. Vivienne found herself watching him work, his movements efficient and practiced. There was something compelling about his quiet competence, his unfailing calm in the face of danger. "Tell me about your life before all this," she said, breaking the silence. "Before the cabin in the woods." Yates glanced up from his task, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. Few people asked him about his past, and fewer still received honest answers. Yet something about Vivienne's direct gaze made evasion seem pointless. "I was born in Missouri," he began, returning to his work as he spoke. "My father was a blacksmith, good man, tough but fair. My mother died when I was young consumption. My sister, Clara, was 8 years older. She practically raised me after mother passed." He paused, memories playing across his face. "When the war came, I enlisted with the Union cavalry, spent 4 years fighting. When it ended, I came west like so many others looking for something, a purpose maybe. And your sister." Vivienne prompted gently, a shadow crossed his face. "Clara married a rancher near Sacramento, seemed happy. I visited when I could. Then one day a group of men came to their ranch looking to steal horses. Her husband was in town. Clara tried to stop them." His hands stilled on the rifle he was cleaning. "They killed her, left her in the yard for her husband to find." Vivienne felt her heart ache for him. "I'm so sorry." Yates nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy. "The law didn't do much. Said there wasn't enough evidence to identify the men responsible, so I tracked them down myself. Took 2 years. And then I was empty," he said simply. "The rage that had driven me was gone, and I didn't know what should take its place. I drifted for a while, took odd jobs. Eventually found that cabin, bought it from an old trapper who was moving east, found some measure of peace there." Vivienne considered his story, recognizing the pain that still lingered beneath his calm exterior. "Do you regret it, taking justice into your own hands?" Yates was silent for a long moment. "I regret that it was necessary," he finally said. "But no, I don't regret standing up for Clara when no one else would." He looked directly at Vivienne. "Just like I don't regret standing up for you." Their eyes held, and Vivienne felt something shift between them, a deepening of the connection that had been forming since their first meeting. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that this man would never abandon her, never betray her trust. It was a powerful realization, both comforting and terrifying in its intensity. The rain began to ease around midday, and they prepared to resume their journey. The plan was to continue west, following the mountain ridge before descending toward the valley that would eventually lead them to San Francisco. "It's about 4 days' ride if the weather holds," Yates explained as they saddled the horses. "We'll need to be careful about where we stop. The Harmons might realize they've been led astray and double back." As they set out, the forest was eerily quiet, the rain having dampened all sound. Their horses moved carefully along the wet trail, hooves occasionally slipping on the slick earth. Despite the challenges, they made good progress, covering several miles before the light began to fade. They made camp in a sheltered ravine, building only a small fire that would be difficult to spot from a distance. As night fell, the temperature dropped dramatically and they huddled close to the flames for warmth. "The marshal in San Francisco," Vivienne said as they shared their meager rations, "you're sure he'll help us?" "Joshua Reed is one of the few lawmen I trust completely," Yates replied. "He was investigating the Harmons even before the bank robbery. He'll want to hear your story." "And then what?" Vivienne asked, the question that had been weighing on her mind finally emerging. "If the Harmons are caught, if this finally ends, what happens after?" Yates looked at her across the fire, understanding the real question beneath her words. What happened to them? To this unexpected connection that had formed in the crucible of danger and shared hardship? "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "My cabin is gone, your job at the ranch. It might not be safe to return there." "A fresh start, perhaps," Vivienne suggested, her voice soft. "Perhaps," Yates agreed, his eyes never leaving hers. The moment was interrupted by a distant sound that instantly put them both on alert, the whinny of a horse, somewhere in the darkness beyond their campsite. "Put out the fire," Yates whispered, already reaching for his rifle. Vivienne quickly scattered the embers, plunging them into darkness broken only by the faint moonlight filtering through the trees. They listened intently, straining to hear any further sounds of approach. For several long minutes there was nothing. Then came the unmistakable crack of a twig breaking, followed by a low voice too distant to make out the words, but clearly human. "Someone's out there," Vivienne breathed, barely audible. Yates nodded, pointing to their horses tethered nearby. With exquisite care, they gathered their essential belongings and moved to the animals. Mounting as silently as possible, they began to edge away from the campsite, using the darkness and the trees for cover. They had gone perhaps 100 yards when a shot rang out, followed by a shout. "There they are, ride," Yates commanded, and they spurred their horses forward, abandoning stealth for speed. More shots followed, bullets whizzing past them as they galloped through the forest. Yates led the way, somehow finding a path through the darkness where Vivienne could see only shadows and obstacles. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew, horses crashing through underbrush, men shouting to each other. "How many?" Vivienne called to Yates as they raced along a ridge. "3, maybe 4, he replied grimly. "We can't outrun them forever on this terrain." As if to emphasize his point, Vivienne's horse stumbled on the uneven ground, nearly sending her flying. She managed to stay mounted, but the horse had slowed, clearly favoring its right front leg. "Yates," she called in alarm. "My horse," he circled back immediately, assessing the situation with a quick glance. "He's lamed," he confirmed. "Can't risk riding him further." The sounds of pursuit were growing closer. Yates made a swift decision, dismounting and helping Vivienne onto his own horse. "There's a narrow pass ahead," he said, pointing into the darkness. "Follow the trail down. At the bottom, you'll find a river. Cross it and keep going west. You'll reach Miners Creek by tomorrow afternoon. Ask for Marshal Reed." "I'm not leaving you," Vivienne protested. "You must," Yates insisted. "I'll hold them off, create a diversion, then I'll catch up." "Yates, Vivienne," he cut her off, his voice urgent but gentle. "Trust me, please." Their eyes met in the moonlight, 1,000 unspoken words passing between them. Then Vivienne leaned down from the saddle and pressed her lips to his brief, desperate, full of promise. "Come back to me," she whispered. "I will," he vowed. "Now go." With a last look at him, Vivienne urged the horse forward, disappearing into the darkness toward the pass. Yates watched until she was out of sight, then turned to face the approaching riders, his rifle ready. He positioned himself behind a large boulder, a defensible spot with a clear view of the trail. The riders would have to pass this point to follow Vivienne. He wouldn't let that happen. The first rider appeared moments later, a shadowy figure against the night sky. Yates took careful aim and fired. The man cried out and fell from his horse, which bolted past Yates's position. 2 more riders appeared, more cautious now, dismounting to use the trees for cover as they advanced. Yates fired again, forcing them to take cover. "That's far enough, Harmon," he called out. "Your quarrel is with me now. Where is she?" a voice shouted back. "Where's the woman?" "Gone," Yates replied, "and you'll never find her." A barrage of gunfire was the response, bullets splintering the rock near Yates's head. He returned fire methodically, making each shot count. When he heard movement to his left, he shifted position, narrowly avoiding a flanking maneuver by the third man. The exchange continued for several minutes, neither side gaining a clear advantage. Then Yates heard what he had been dreading, the sound of more horses approaching from the direction of their abandoned campsite. Reinforcements. His position was becoming untenable. He needed to move, to lead them away from Vivienne's escape route. Taking a deep breath, he broke from cover and sprinted toward a cluster of trees to his right, firing as he ran. Bullets kicked up dirt at his heels, but he reached the new position unscathed. From there, he worked his way gradually south, away from the pass Vivienne had taken. The Harmons followed, clearly believing he was still with Vivienne or leading them to her. It was exactly what Yates wanted them to think. By dawn, he had led them nearly 3 miles from the pass, engaging in periodic firefights to maintain their interest without allowing them to get too close. He was exhausted, running low on ammunition, but satisfied that Vivienne had gained a substantial head start. Then his luck ran out. As he crossed a small clearing, a bullet found its mark, tearing through his left side. The impact knocked him to the ground, his rifle spinning away. Pain blazed through him, hot and immediate. Gritting his teeth, Yates crawled to the shelter of a fallen log, drawing his revolver. Blood soaked his shirt, but he forced himself to focus. Not yet, he told himself. Can't stop yet. The Harmons approached cautiously, having learned respect for his marksmanship over the long night. Yates counted 4 men now, including the bearded leader he had confronted at his cabin. "It's over, Cowboy," the leader called. "Tell us where she went and maybe we'll let you live." "Go to hell, Harmon," Yates replied, his voice steady despite the pain. The bearded man laughed. "After you." He gestured to his companions, who began to spread out, preparing to rush Yates's position from multiple directions. Yates knew he couldn't stop them all. He would take as many as he could with him, but his thoughts were on Vivienne, hoping she had made it to safety, that his sacrifice would not be in vain. As the Harmons tensed to make their move, a new sound cut through the forest, horses approaching at a gallop, many of them. The Harmons turned in confusion as 6 riders burst into the clearing, rifles raised. "U.S. Marshal," a commanding voice shouted. "Drop your weapons." For a moment, no one moved. Then the bearded Harmon raised his gun and the forest erupted in gunfire. When it ended seconds later, 3 of the Harmons lay dead, and the 4th, the leader, was wounded and disarmed. Yates leaned against the log, light-headed from blood loss. A tall man with a silver star on his vest approached, concern on his weathered face. "Yates Vance," the man said, kneeling beside him. "Didn't expect to find you out here." "Joshua," Yates managed, recognizing his old friend. "How?" "A woman rode into Miners Creek about 2 hours ago," Marshal Reed explained, examining Yates's wound. "Most determined lady I've ever met. Said you were in trouble, and she wouldn't take no for an answer when I suggested she stay behind." As if summoned by his words, Vivienne appeared at the edge of the clearing, dismounting and running to Yates's side. Her face was pale with fear as she saw his blood-soaked shirt. "You promised," she said, her voice breaking as she knelt beside him. "You promised you'd come back." Despite the pain, Yates managed a smile. "And here I am." "Stubborn man," she whispered, taking his hand in hers. Marshal Reed called for his men to bring the medical supplies. "He's lost blood, but the bullet passed clean through," he assessed. "With proper care, he should recover." They fashioned a stretcher to transport Yates back to Miners Creek, where the town doctor could tend to his wound properly. As they prepared to move him, Yates held tightly to Vivienne's hand. "You came back for me," he said softly. "Of course I did," she replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "We're partners, remember." The journey to Miners Creek was a blur of pain for Yates. He drifted in and out of consciousness, always anchored by Vivienne's presence beside him. By the time they reached the small mining town, fever had set in, his body fighting the trauma of the gunshot wound. The town doctor, a gruff man named Turner, cleaned and stitched the wound, then administered laudanum for the pain. "He's strong," he told Vivienne, who refused to leave Yates's side. "But the next day or 2 will tell the tale. Watch for signs of infection." Marshal Reed had the surviving Harmon brother, Luke, securely locked in the town jail. "He'll stand trial for his crimes," he assured Vivienne, "and with your testimony he'll hang just like his brother did." "What about the others?" Vivienne asked. "You said there were 4 brothers." "My deputies are tracking the last one," Reed replied. "Thomas Harmon. He wasn't with the group we intercepted, but don't worry, we'll find him." Vivienne spent the next 3 days at Yates's bedside, leaving only when absolutely necessary. The fever burned through him, sometimes causing him to call out in delirium. When this happened, Vivienne would hold his hand and speak soothingly until he quieted. On the 4th day, the fever broke. Yates woke to find Vivienne dozing in a chair beside his bed, her hand still clasping his. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating her features softened in sleep. Despite his weakness, Yates felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. "Vivienne," he whispered. Her eyes flew open immediately. When she saw that he was awake and lucid, joy transformed her face. "Yates," she breathed. "You're back." "Seems like I am," he agreed, his voice hoarse from disuse. She helped him drink some water, then insisted on calling the doctor to examine him. Dr. Turner pronounced himself cautiously optimistic. "The wound is healing clean," he told them. "Another week of rest and you should be able to travel." Carefully, when they were alone again, Yates asked about the Harmons. Vivienne explained what had happened, how she had reached Miners Creek and convinced Marshall Reed to mount an immediate rescue, how they had captured Luke Harmon and were pursuing the fourth brother. "You could have kept riding to San Francisco," Yates observed. "Been safe there." Vivienne looked at him incredulously. "And leave you to die? What kind of person do you think I am?" "The kind who survives," he replied simply. "Not without you," she said softly. "Not anymore." Their eyes met, and this time there was no interruption, no danger to pull them away from the moment. Vivienne leaned forward, her lips meeting his in a kiss that held all the emotion of the past week, the fear, the courage, the growing bond between them. When they parted, Yates reached up to touch her cheek. "I've never met anyone like you, Vivienne Oakes." "Nor I you, Yates Vance," she replied, a smile lighting her eyes. "Which makes me think that perhaps all of this, the danger, the pursuit, even your injury, was somehow worth it. It brought us together." "A high price for an introduction," Yates observed dryly, but his eyes were warm. "The best things often come at a cost," she countered. As Yates recovered over the next week, they spent long hours in conversation, learning each other's stories, hopes, and dreams. Vivienne spoke of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her journey west after losing her parents to influenza, her determination to make a life for herself in a world that often viewed independent women with suspicion. "What will you do now?" Yates asked one evening as they sat on the small porch of the doctor's house, watching the sunset over the mountains. "After all this is truly over," Vivienne considered the question. "I'm not sure. My position at the ranch. Even if it's still available, I don't think I could go back to that life. It would seem too small somehow after everything that's happened." "I know what you mean," Yates agreed. "My cabin is gone. Even if I rebuilt it, it wouldn't be the same." There was a moment of silence between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. "Yates," Vivienne began hesitantly, "I've been thinking. Marshall Reed mentioned that he's been trying to establish a proper office in San Francisco. He said he needs deputies, people he can trust." Yates raised an eyebrow. "You think I should become a lawman?" "I think you already are in all the ways that matter," she replied. "And San Francisco, it's a growing city. There would be opportunities for both of us there." The implication was clear: a future together, building something new from the ashes of what they had lost. Yates took her hand, his expression thoughtful. "It's worth considering," he said. "Though I'm not sure how well I'd take to city life after so long in the mountains." "We wouldn't have to stay forever," Vivienne pointed out. "Just long enough to save some money, make a plan. There are beautiful places all along the coast, small towns where we could eventually settle." "We," Yates repeated softly, a question in his voice. Vivienne met his gaze steadily. "Yes, we, unless I've misunderstood what's happening between us." "You haven't," he assured her, bringing her hand to his lips. "Not at all." Their moment was interrupted by the arrival of Marshall Reed, his expression grim as he approached the porch. "Evening," he greeted them. "Sorry to disturb you, but I have news that can't wait." "You found Thomas Harmon," Yates guessed. Reed nodded. "In a manner of speaking. He was spotted in Yosemite yesterday. Apparently he was asking questions about both of you." Vivienne felt a chill despite the warm evening. "He's still coming after us." "I'm afraid so," Reed confirmed. "But that's not the worst of it. Last night, someone broke Luke Harmon out of the jail in Miners Creek. One of my deputies was killed in the process." Yates straightened, wincing slightly at the pull on his healing wound. "Both brothers are free and looking for us." "It appears that way," Reed agreed. "I've sent telegrams to law enforcement throughout the region, but—" he shrugged, the gesture conveying the limitations of frontier justice. "What do you suggest we do?" Vivienne asked. Reed considered for a moment. My offer stands. Come to San Francisco. I can provide protection there, at least until we recapture the Harmons. Yates and Vivienne exchanged a glance, a silent communication passing between them. We were just discussing that possibility, Yates told Reed. But running and hiding indefinitely isn't a solution. These men won't stop until they find us or we stop them. What are you suggesting? Reed asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. We draw them out, Yates said simply. On our terms, not theirs. Reed frowned. That's risky, especially with you still recovering. It's riskier to wait until they choose the time and place, Yates countered. Vivienne squeezed his hand. We've been reacting since this began. Maybe it's time we took the initiative. After further discussion, a plan began to take shape. Word would be strategically leaked that Yates and Vivienne were traveling to San Francisco, but they would actually remain in Miners Creek, prepared for the Harmons' inevitable attempt to intercept them. It's dangerous, Reed warned again. These men have nothing to lose now. Neither do we, in a way, Vivienne observed. Our old lives are gone, but we have everything to gain by ending this once and for all. The marshal reluctantly agreed to their plan. He would leave for San Francisco the next day, ostensibly escorting them, but would actually circle back with several trusted deputies to help spring the trap. That night, as Vivienne prepared for bed in the small room adjoining Yates's, she felt a curious calm. The fear that had been her constant companion since fleeing Sacramento had receded, replaced by a steady resolve. Whatever happened in the days ahead, she would face it alongside Yates, the man who had risked everything for her, who had seen her courage when others saw only vulnerability. A soft knock at her door drew her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Yates standing there, looking more like himself than he had since the injury. I couldn't sleep, he explained simply. Too many thoughts. Vivienne understood completely. She stepped aside, inviting him in. They sat together on the edge of her bed, the small oil lamp casting long shadows across the room. Are you afraid? He asked after a moment of companionable silence. Vivienne considered the question honestly. Yes, she admitted, but not like before. It's different now. Because we're not running. Because I'm not alone, she corrected gently. And neither are you. Yates took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. I keep thinking about what happens after assuming we survive this final confrontation. What are you thinking? She prompted when he fell silent. He met her gaze directly, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she had rarely seen. I'm thinking that I don't want to lose you, Vivienne. Not to the Harmons, not to distance, not to separate paths after the danger has passed. Vivienne's heart seemed to expand in her chest, filled with an emotion too powerful to name. You won't, she promised. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Yates raised his free hand to cup her cheek, his touch infinitely tender. I never expected to find you, he said softly. I'd resigned myself to solitude, convinced it was what I deserved after everything that happened with Clara. And now, Vivienne whispered, now I can't imagine going back to that life, he confessed. You've reminded me that there's more to living than just surviving. Their lips met in a kiss that held both promise and passion, a bridge between what had been and what might be. When they parted, Vivienne rested her forehead against his, unwilling to break the connection between them. Stay with me tonight, she said softly, just to sleep. I don't want to be apart from you, not when tomorrow is so uncertain. Yates nodded, understanding in his eyes. They lay down together on the narrow bed, his arm around her waist, her back against his chest. In that position, with his steady heartbeat against her shoulder blade, Vivienne found the peace that had eluded her for so long. Morning brought renewed purpose. Marshal Reed departed ostentatiously, making sure the entire town knew he was escorting the witnesses to San Francisco. Meanwhile, Yates and Vivienne moved to a small cabin on the outskirts of town, a more defensible position selected by Reed's most trusted deputy, a former Army scout named Ellis. The Harmons will come, Ellis predicted as they surveyed the cabin's surroundings. Probably tonight or tomorrow. They won't be able to resist the opportunity. Yates nodded, examining the approaches to the cabin with a tactical eye. We'll be ready. They spent the day preparing cleaning weapons, positioning furniture to provide cover, discussing scenarios and responses. By sunset, everything was in place. 3 deputies were concealed at strategic points around the property, while Yates and Vivienne waited inside the cabin. Night fell, bringing with it a tense silence. Hours passed with no sign of the Harmons. Vivienne sat by the fire, a book open in her lap, but her attention focused on the darkness beyond the windows. Yates moved between vantage points, checking and rechecking their preparations. Maybe they didn't take the bait, Vivienne suggested as midnight approached. They took it, Yates assured her. They're just being cautious. As if to prove his point, a soft bird call sounded from outside the signal from one of the deputies that someone was approaching. Yates immediately extinguished the lamp, leaving only the fire's glow to illuminate the cabin. "Get down," he whispered, moving to his position near the window. Vivienne took cover behind the heavy oak table they had overturned earlier, her revolver ready. The silence that followed seemed to stretch endlessly, broken only by the occasional pop from the fire. Then it came a single shot that shattered the window on the far side of the cabin. Glass fragments scattered across the floor as Yates returned fire, aiming at the muzzle flash he had glimpsed in the darkness. More shots followed, coming from multiple directions. The Harmons were attempting to pin them down with crossfire. Outside, the deputies engaged, their positions providing flanking fire that momentarily confused the attackers. "They're trying to reach the back door," Yates called to Vivienne, having spotted movement in that direction. She shifted position, keeping her weapon trained on the rear entrance. Sure enough, moments later, the door burst open and a man rushed in, gun blazing. Vivienne fired twice, her shots finding their mark. The intruder fell, his weapon clattering to the floor. "Luke Harmon," Yates confirmed, glancing at the fallen man. "That leaves Thomas." The firing outside intensified, then abruptly ceased. In the sudden silence, a voice called out from the darkness, "Vance, I know you're in there. Send out the woman and maybe you live through this night." "That's not going to happen, Harmon," Yates replied steadily. "It's over. Your brothers are dead. Put down your gun and surrender." A harsh laugh was the response. "Not likely. She has to pay for what she did to our family. An eye for an eye, isn't that what the good book says?" "Your brother was a murderer," Vivienne called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "He killed innocent people. I only told the truth about what I saw." "Shut up," Thomas Harmon shouted, his voice raw with grief and rage. "You don't get to talk about him." Yates caught Vivienne's eye, then gestured toward the rear of the cabin. She understood immediately he was going to try to circle behind Harmon while keeping him distracted. "Thomas," Yates called, moving slowly toward the back exit, "think about what you're doing. Your whole family is gone." "Do you really want to die here too?" "I ain't afraid of dying," came the reply. "Not if I take her with me." While Yates continued the exchange, Vivienne maintained her position, ready to provide covering fire if needed. She heard the soft creak of the back door as Yates slipped out, then silence. Long minutes passed. The conversation had ceased and an eerie quiet settled over the scene. Vivienne strained to hear any sound that might indicate what was happening outside, then came a shout, followed by 2 gunshots in rapid succession. Vivienne's heart seemed to stop. Whose shots were those? Who had fallen? The front door opened slowly. Vivienne raised her revolver, steadying her aim. Yates stepped through the doorway, blood seeping from a cut on his forehead but otherwise unharmed. "It's done," he said simply. "Thomas Harmon won't threaten anyone again." Relief washed over Vivienne in a dizzying wave. She lowered her weapon and crossed the room to Yates, needing to touch him to confirm that he was truly safe. He gathered her in his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. "It's really over," she whispered. "It's really over," he confirmed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. The deputies entered the cabin, reporting that they had suffered no casualties. Plans were made to transport the bodies to town in the morning and send word to Marshal Reed that the threat had been neutralized. As dawn broke over Miners Creek, Yates and Vivienne sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. Their hands were intertwined, a simple connection that spoke volumes. "What happens now?" Vivienne asked, echoing the question they had discussed days earlier. Yates considered for a moment. "I've been thinking about Reed's offer the deputy position in San Francisco. And I think I'd like to accept," he said. "At least for a while. After everything that's happened, helping to uphold the law seems like the right path." Vivienne smiled, squeezing his hand. "I think so too, and San Francisco has schools that might need teachers." "Is that what you want?" Yates asked. "To return to teaching, I loved it," she admitted. "Helping children discover the world through books, watching their minds grow." "There's nothing quite like it." Yates nodded thoughtfully. "Then that's what you should do, and perhaps after we've established ourselves." He trailed off, suddenly hesitant. Vivienne turned to face him, her expression encouraging him to continue. "After we've established ourselves," he began again, more decisively now, "perhaps we could consider making our arrangement more permanent." Vivienne's heart skipped a beat. "Yates Vance, are you proposing to me?" A smile spread across his face, transforming his usually serious features. "Not very elegantly, it seems. But yes, I am. Not right away, we should give ourselves time to be sure, to build something solid, but eventually, if you're willing." Vivienne leaned forward, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that conveyed her answer more eloquently than words could. When they parted, she was smiling too. "I'm willing," she said softly. "More than willing." 2 weeks later, they boarded a stagecoach bound for San Francisco. Vivienne looked back at the mountains one last time, marveling at how much had changed since she had fled through them, desperate and alone. Beside her, Yates followed her gaze, seeming to read her thoughts. "We'll come back someday," he promised, "when the time is right." "I'd like that," she replied, settling against him as the stage began to move. "But for now, I'm looking forward to what lies ahead." As the coach carried them toward their future, Vivienne reflected on the strange path that had brought them together, a path marked by danger and loss, but also by courage, trust, and ultimately, love. What had begun as a desperate flight from men bent on revenge had transformed into a journey toward something neither of them had expected to find: a second chance, a partner, a home in each other. 5 years later, Yates and Vivienne Vance stood on the porch of their new home, a modest but comfortable house overlooking a small bay north of San Francisco. The years in the city had been good to them. Yates had risen to become one of Marshal Reed's most trusted deputies, while Vivienne had established herself as a respected teacher at a school for girls. But the call of a quieter life had eventually proven irresistible. With their savings, they had purchased this property with its views of both mountains and sea. Yates had built much of the house himself, with help from friends they had made along the way. "Papa, Mama, look what I found." Their 4-year-old son, Samuel, came running from the beach below, a perfect sand dollar clutched in his small hand. Behind him toddled their 2-year-old daughter, Clara, named for the aunt she would never meet but whose spirit lived on in her father's stories. Vivienne knelt to examine her son's treasure, her heart full as she watched Yates swing little Clara up onto his shoulders, the child's delighted laughter ringing in the clear air. This was what they had fought for, what they had risked everything to build, not just survival, but a life filled with love and possibility. That evening, after the children were asleep, Vivienne joined Yates on the porch, where he sat watching the last light fade from the sky. She handed him a cup of coffee and settled into the chair beside his, their nightly ritual. "I had a letter from Sarah Fletcher today," she told him. "She and Marcus are thinking of visiting in the spring." Yates smiled at the mention of their old friends. It would be good to see them. "It's been too long." She also mentioned that they've heard nothing of any remaining Harmons for years now, Vivienne added. "It seems that chapter truly is closed. Yates nodded, reaching over to take her hand. Some ghosts finally rest. They sat in companionable silence for a time, listening to the distant sound of waves breaking on the shore below. Eventually, Vivienne spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "Do you ever regret it? Leaving the mountains, becoming a lawman, all of it?" Yates considered her question seriously, as he did all things. "No," he said finally. "The mountains taught me solitude, and there was healing in that, but this life with you, with our children, this has taught me joy." He brought her hand to his lips. "How could I regret that?" Vivienne felt tears prick at her eyes, moved as always by his quiet eloquence. "When I was running from the Harmons, I thought my life was ending. I never imagined it was just beginning." Yates smiled, the expression transforming his face in the way that still made her heart skip a beat. "The best stories often start that way, I think, with an ending that turns out to be a beginning in disguise." As night settled fully around them, they remained on the porch, hands clasped, sharing the peace they had fought so hard to find. The journey that had begun with a desperate ride to a stranger's cabin had led them here to home, to family, to a love that had been forged in danger but would flourish in peace for all the years to come.